Welcome back to the Flyers Nitty Gritty podcast, getting gritty with it with your host, Yariv, Wolok, and my special guest for the evening. Welcome back. Good friend of the show, Alex Appleyard. Thank you for coming back to the show. Those who are not aware, Alex writes for The Athletic, covers the Flyers, covers prospects. One of the most notable, I would say, if you're not following him locally for feedback on local prospects, you should be doing so. You're behind. Alex, welcome back to the show. Thanks for joining.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for having me on again, Yariv. Making me blush with a glowing introduction.
Yeah, but to be honest with you, I truly believe that. I mean, for those who don't know, Alex and I are both avid readers of HF Board, so I kind of bumped into him as we were younger over the years, and you're authentic, man. You know, you watch the games, your opinions are real. It doesn't matter if everybody agrees with you or not. I don't think that stuff is relevant. I just want a real opinion. I know you actually care. I know you actually deeply follow this team. And, you know, you have an attitude where you're very, I feel like you're very measured with your takes. Like you never go too far. You try not to build up a player too much, but you also like to get excited about a player and not be like, he's never going to be that good. You know, you kind of explored both opportunities. I've always appreciated that.
Thanks. Yeah. Try not to be too reactionary, although it's hard at times, especially with David Cachet.
Yes. Yes. Actually, you know what? I'm going to add him to the list because we weren't going to talk about Cachet, but he's doing well. And I released like all these rankings lists, and that was a tough one. And Elliot Denoyer, I want to kind of talk about this left wing situation that I had going on there, and I want to get your opinion. So we'll go into that a little bit later. I do want to start off with this. Actually, let me do this first. I do need to do this. For those that are not aware, we have a new sponsor for the show, Jim Steaks here on South. Alex, I don't know if you've ever had Jim Steaks here on South Street. They've been here for a very long time. We're super honored to have them. It's just really awesome. They have great cheesesteaks. If you've never had a cheesesteak in Philly, obviously with COVID, things are weird, but they're still in business and they're still rolling out. And just so everybody's aware, they love the Flyers. When we reached out to them, that's why they wanted to work with us. Mainly for that reason, because they love Flyers. So for those who are not aware, big Flyer supporting teams, to go check out Jim's Steak on South. All right, let me move past that. But let's talk about the beginning of the season. We have a new date set. January 13th is a kind of a tentative date. We have a new kind of schedule based on 56 games. The division set at kind of mixed at this point, but we kind of have an idea of what they'll be. We know that there's going to be maybe a Canadian division. Whether they're going to play in Canada or US is still not clear. But what do you think, Alex? What do you think about this 56-game season where primarily it seems like it's going to be, I don't think I'm getting this wrong. It's just 8 times per team. So pretty much the Flyers are going to be playing each team in the division 8 times. So it's going to be a lot of consistent, a lot of heavy rivalries, and top 4 teams make the playoffs. What do you think? What do you think about that type of setup?
I think it's going to be interesting. I'm not looking forward to potentially playing teams like the Islanders and the Bruins maybe that many times in a year. Some teams I think the Flyers don't match up against too well, but at the same time, there are quite a few teams who they do match up against like really quite well and can really take points off them. I think the Flyers division is probably going to be the toughest division. But it would have been the toughest division even without coronavirus. So either way, I'm just happy there's going to be a schedule, be it 82 games or 56 games or, like the other year, 48 games. It's going to be great to see hockey again. And quite frankly, the schedule and the division shouldn't affect too much because, in my opinion, the Flyers should be one of the top 10 teams in the NHL. And if they're one of the top 10 teams in the NHL, they're one of the top 4 teams in the division. And if they're one of the top 4 in the teams in the division, they make a playoffs. So yeah, that's where I'm kind of standing on it right now.
I think that's pretty much where I stand on it. I've seen some crazy talk that the Flyers would be ranked 5th in the Metro. I don't really know where that's coming from. I agree with you. I think the thing with the Bruins and the Islanders, I don't think it's ever a talent issue with the Flyers, at least not in the modern era. I'm talking about maybe the past, 3-4 years. Even in the AV, and I think we're actually moving away from this right now, and this is the best the Flyers have ever looked, but the more disciplined teams, and I don't mean like discipline is not taking penalties, I mean team defense discipline and just structure, patience, those teams, they seem to give the Flyers the most problems. The teams that can outweight the Flyers, right? You can wait, they won't get desperate they won't be making as many desperate plays. And I feel like the Flyers they have bad habits when teams play really structured. And I think that's kind of what gets to the Flyers. Do you see anything I'm talking there?
Yeah, I can see some of it. I think as well, part of the problem in the playoffs was I think they kind of started to play down to Montreal and thought that they couldn't play their style of hockey and win, which I think is always a dangerous route to go. If you've played your style of hockey all year and got to the playoffs with it, you just have to stick with it and get through with it, because the way the Flyers played against Montreal then I think kind of bled into the Islanders series. And they played two teams with probably less talent up and down the roster than them in their style, and a style that the Flyers weren't super used to playing in. And it kind of suited those teams. And obviously versus Montreal, they weren't talented enough to overcome the Flyers. But with the Islanders, I think you saw that the odds kind of got turned in the Islanders' favour because the Flyers weren't getting in hard on the forecheck, making defensemen put under pressure, and getting pucks turned up, which is what they've done so well all year. I mean, their forechecking game most of the year was fantastic, and then in the playoffs, it was non-existent, with them sat further back in the zone and trying to clog the zone in order not to allow breakaways, not to allow chances, not allow the opposition to get set up. And I think that, especially in the Islanders, played into the Islanders' hands. Combine that with lethargic power play, and it was kind of the mix of a recipe for disaster.
I think I pretty much agree with all of that. I mean, you add in the fact that the power play woes, you can't even sneak value in your skills. If you can't, even if you're a more talented team, if you're not scoring on special teams, it's like, the Flyers are more talented on paper than the Islanders, right? And like you said, you can get away with it with Montreal. They have a large gap, I would say, overall against Canadians. Not that the Canadians don't have elite talent over there. They just overall top down from the team. But the Islanders, there's not as big of a gap, right? They have abilities to match up against the Flyers. And you saw when they play that type of game, when they played their game and the Flyers weren't playing their game, it was very noticeable. And during the season, I didn't feel that, though, right? Like, the Islanders got the best of the Flyers during the regular season, too. But the Flyers still played a better game overall during the season. It's almost like there's always that team, right? Like the Devils used to be that team to the Flyers, or there was the Penguins a little bit. And it feels like now it's just the Islanders in a weird way. Yeah,
it's going to be interesting to see. I think the good thing for the Flyers is they're one of the teams on the up in the division. Whereas I think kind of the Islanders, they have Matt Barzal, obviously, he's fantastic, but most of the rest of their kind of talent is either at their prime or at their peak or slightly past it. And the same can probably be said for the Penguins and the Capitals as well. I mean, the team that really scare me in the future are Carolina. If they could figure out their goaltending situation, I mean, they might be the best team in the division.
Interesting. Well, they have a lot of young talent. I did, you kind of look at their defense right now, and they're 6 deep. I mean, it's clear they're 6 deep. Like, they don't have a hole in their D, and they probably have, you can say they're 7 deep. And it's not like, I guess with Niskanen, you could say the Flyers were 6 deep as well, but there's just some question marks, a little bit with the Flyers D, where Carolina, you really don't see it if they're healthy. Right? Like, everybody's got their role on that defense. Their offense now has elite offensive punch, right, with Svechnikov and Aho. So it is starting to fill out. I doubted them a couple years ago, but I was kind of right in the reasons to doubt them. But now as they mature and as they added Vincent Voracek as well, right, Brady Shea, Vatanen, like, these guys, they're going to help. And that's really what it comes down to, is depth. Like, Carolina is going to come to a point where they can attack it on all, at least 3 lines rolling of scoring and top defensive units, right? And but the X factor is the goaltender. And, while they compensate with D, I mean, do you think that goaltender, do you think Mrazek is really enough for Carolina to be a top-tier team?
I mean, I think we've seen time and time again, goalies are so inconsistent, even apart from the top few goalies in the league. Goalies are so inconsistent, and the talent level between goalies is actually not that great, I think, over the league, that anyone can kind of catch fire for a playoff series or for a whole playoffs. I mean, you look at, funnily enough, when Carolina won it last time round, Cam Ward just completely took over as a young kid, got them a cup, and then everyone was thinking, this guy's going to be one of the best goalies in the NHL for years. Never really fulfilled the potential. It was a great flash in the pan that helped them win a cup, and I think that can happen with anyone. That being said, for someone like Mrazek to go 20, 21, 28 games of winning, where I don't quite see it right now, and I think it's something we're going to try and invest in down the line.
See, and that's where I think the Flyers do have the edge. And I'm very high on Carter Hart. Maybe I'm a little bit of a homer about him, but I do see him as a franchise caliber player. And when I see like holes on the Flyers back end, that's why I don't worry as much, because even though he's young, we have enough talent in net to have an X factor where even on the worst nights where maybe our team isn't playing that well, we have an edge because our goaltender can steal games on a very regular basis. And I don't feel like the Flyers have really been in that position for a while. I think obviously the Rangers are kind of leading in that direction, but like you said, Carolina doesn't have that. And I feel like it gives me the confidence the Flyers have this depth and have this depth at D and forward, and we know they do, right? At both levels, and then goaltender. Do you see the Flyers finishing kind of at the top there with, again, I'm trying to keep in mind, this is not a normal season, right? So we have a 56-game season starting all weird with 8 games against the same Metro teams, which they did have success against last year. Very good success outside of the Islanders, essentially, and a little bit of the Pens. But they dominate. I think they were 13-5-1. And if you remove the Islanders, I think they were 13-2-1 or something in the season overall against the Metro. Bodes well for them. Do you see them finishing? I know you said top 4, but do you see them finishing at the top? And if not, who do you see at the top?
It's difficult. I mean, if you're looking at kind of odds from Vegas and combined odds, the odds are generally the Flyers finishing top of the division. And now I'm not a betting man, and I don't think odds are always the best way to go around things, but they're up there. When you look at, I think Niskanen retiring effectively is a bit of a hit. Yep. But in an ideal world next year, Niskanen was only going to be a number 4 anyway. And we saw that as the season went on, that Sanheim and then Myers took an even bigger role on the defense. Sanheim started out the year really inconsistently, I would say. He had those bizarre falls, like 3 or 4 bizarre falls in November and December for a guy who's a fantastic 4-way skater. But after that, after Christmas, and when Myers was kind of cemented in a role as well, both of them, I think, were the second and third best defenseman on the Flyers after Provorov from January until the end of the Canadian series. I mean, if it wasn't for that pairing, I'm not sure the Flyers get through the Canadian series at all, because Niskanen had a rough series, Braun had a really rough series as well, and it was those two really carrying the defense, scoring important goals, setting up chances. And yeah, they had a wobble against the Islanders, but really, in my mind, I was expecting Sanheim to step up and kind of be the number 2, and Myers the number 3 this year anyway. And Niskanen, if he was back, to have a role, but more as, Provorov's partner, like when the Flyers had Pronger. Mark Carl was the team's number 4 and everyone knew it, but he was playing up there with Provorov. And I think that's going to be interesting this year in terms of who fills Niskanen's role alongside Provorov. And that's really the biggest question I have with the Flyers going into next year.
And that was going to be my follow-up question. I agree with you with the order there, and this is kind of going back and forth with a lot of people, but I don't really think it's much of a question that it's Provorov, Sanheim, Myers at this point. Starting at the point we are today, just assuming going from last season, just look at the minutes played. Even though Myers got a boost in minutes, so did Sanheim, and Sanheim played, I thought, very well. For a young defenseman, it seems like he's catching up to that top pairing potential that we're waiting for. Where do you think Myers is? Do you think? I kind of expected this, even if Niskanen was going to be with the team, that they would experiment with this of Provorov, Phil Myers pairing. And I know the Sanheim-Myers pairing worked really well, and I'm sure that they'll consider going back to that. But this idea of having this, top pairing 6'5" large defenseman playing with your number 1 defenseman, I mean, it seems like almost like perfect on paper. Do you see them, rolling with that at some point this season?
I think the only issue I can really see in terms of a stylistic fit is actually regarding Sanheim. In that Sanheim is probably the only one of the Flyers' best 5 defensemen, who's kind of poor at his own blue line. He's actually quite good around his own net, even though he's not, the biggest guy, like weight-wise, and he's fine on the boards, but he's a bit tentative at the blue line and allows entries. Myers and Provorov are the best 2 Flyers in terms of kind of how they don't allow zone entries. So I think then if you put in Sanheim alongside someone else, that can potentially be an issue. I mean, you have Braun, who's obviously a very, very good defenseman. Well, he was last year in the regular season, and good at his own blue line.
Yep.
But is Braun going to be the number 4 this season and be playing alongside Sanheim all year? I don't think so. No. So if you're moving Myers from Sanheim, then who are you putting on that other side? That's my biggest issue with that.
Right, agreed. But then what do you think about that? Because Provorov's getting the tougher minutes, right? So is your thought there, maybe keep Myers on the second pairing, maybe elevate, I don't know, Ghost, give it a shot, or Gustafsson, and try Sanheim on the right side? Would that be something you would prefer, you think? Or
I think if it was up to me, what I would try going into training camp and into the preseason games is Ghost alongside Provorov. It's maybe a long shot at this point, but we know that Ghost has been injured. We know he's had surgery. We know last year he wasn't fully healthy, and I think that really impacted him. And it's a while ago now, but if you go back to 2017-18 and then the start of 2018-19, Provorov and Gostisbehere were together, and statistically were one of the best pairings in the NHL for a good 8-9 months. Maybe they can catch fire in a pan again, but maybe I wouldn't bet on it. But I'd like to see just on the off chance that they would, because they worked really well together and they complemented each other well. And Provorov made up for a lot of Ghost's flaws, and Gostisbehere gave Provorov more space to jump into the rush as well. So I think that's what I try to begin and keep, Sanheim and Myers together as a top four. And look, if that doesn't work out, Sanheim played well with Provorov as well for a while when he first came into the NHL, and then last year a bit as well. So there are options. I think it's just finding those partnerships that work really well together. Sanheim did play well with Braun last year when they were together at the start of the season as well. So it is an option, even though I don't think it's ideal to have Braun in a top four.
No. Not at this point in his career, but I do agree with you. He's got a fantastic stick. He's really good in his own zone. He's responsible. He's strong. He's not perfect, but as a bottom pairing defenseman, I think he's really adequate. I don't know about top four anymore. I kind of agree with you. It's like, if you have to, it's not the end of the world, especially if he has the right partner. He can be complimentary. You can say something about Hag, I guess, to an extent. But it's not ideal. So it's interesting you say the Ghost thing, because, man, I love the sound of that. I really do, because I remember that pairing. I remember where Ghost actually, that was at a point where you're like, well, Ghost is a top pairing defenseman, and we have two of the best young defensemen in the NHL. We have the best young duo potentially right now. Provorov, I think he had 17 goals that year, if I remember, at even strength. It was insane. They were ridiculous. And then to watch a drop off like that, my assumption has always been that it's been an injury with Ghost. The confidence with me, it's always lightning skill. It doesn't have to be speed. It's his ability to read that game offensively, to make those passes, the confidence to juke, the confidence to I remember even when he joined the team, Del Zotto started doing spin moves, and I was like, oh, his game affected the rest of the team immediately. His swagger started trickling down. I would love to see that. And I'd be actually really happy if they did that and then had Gustafsson on the bottom pairing with Braun. That would be really cool to see in the beginning. My only concern is, how do you go from benching a guy? And again, maybe it's just the injury and that's they're aware of, to top pairing. I want to see it. I would love to see it do it. So I'm with you, but I hesitate being like, well, maybe AV doesn't see it that way, where like he doesn't remember those 2 years ago, and we do, but he wasn't here. So he's like, what do you think?
Yeah, it's one of those things. I think that I hope you do try it. And I think there is a possibility with how the pairings kind of match up. If it is that AV wants to keep, Sanheim together with Myers, well, is he going to put Braun up there alongside Provorov? Maybe not. Is he going to put Hag upside there with Provorov? Almost certainly not. And then you get down to a coin flip between Gustafsson and Gostisbehere. Now, Gostisbehere's a better blue line defender than Gustafsson, and he's got a bigger shot, and maybe he complements Provorov on paper a bit more. But yeah, there is the fact that last year he was not very good at all. I love Gostisbehere, but last year he was arguably the worst defenseman on the team, which is kind of unexpected, especially since he had a good preseason.
He looked great. He looked great in preseason. I totally agree with you. I think that's a great point. So
it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. In an ideal world, if everyone is at a decent level, I think Provorov, Gostisbehere, Sanheim, Myers, Gustafsson, and then Braun is a perfect kind of, on paper, set of defensive pairings, because they complement each other quite well. Braun needs someone to move the puck for him, because that's his weakness. He still skates pretty well. He's good at his own blue line. He's good in his own zone. But if you're asking, we saw in the playoffs with Braun and Hag at times, like when it was one of those two being asked to move a puck up ice, it means you're just not breaking out and not being able to find passes up ice. And Hag, I think, is actually quite good once he's in the neutral zone and getting into the offensive zone with the puck. But in terms of actually skating the puck out of trouble in the neutral zone, it's something he doesn't do very well. So that's one pairing I kind of do want to avoid going into next year.
Yeah, and that's kind of my fear. Before we move on, that's kind of my fear about is that sometimes the coach makes these pairings where like they make me uncomfortable. And sometimes they pay off, right? But like when I see Haig and Braun as a pairing, I'm not necessarily screaming like, "Hey, that line really, that pairing is really going to be a long-term solution," right? I'm more of like that's clearly a stopgap, right? You're clearly uncomfortable. Something's not working for you. You have two defensive defensemen near each other. The puck doesn't leave the zone. And it's like, it's almost like you're playing scared. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah. So, all right, let's move on here. Real quick, they did also announce a 23-man roster. There will be a taxi squad. From what I understand, 4 to 6 players from the AHL are potentially available to be following the team. The AHL has not necessarily announced the season. I believe they're due for an announcement maybe next week, if I remember correctly. But they're shooting for February, so that would still give potentially about 2 weeks, maybe a month, if they do have a season, where these players kind of follow the team. A couple names that, obviously would be thrown around as extras: Frost, maybe a Allison, maybe a Tanner Lazinski, maybe a Igor Zamula, Wyatt Wiley. Maybe obviously Ustamenko is probably going to be carried along, or either Alex Lyon, one of the two. Maybe it'll be at Lyon, actually, most likely. But they'll be going to carry on some extra players, right? Trying to maybe just keep them with the team. Anybody specific you think maybe I didn't mention, or anything in general that you think could be like a big X factor that could go from this AHL team to maybe making the team going into next season? Because it's kind of a unique opportunity.
Yeah, I think it is. And especially since obviously injuries are going to come into play because this is the NHL and people get injured.
100%.
I think what's going to be interesting is up front, because the Flyers basically don't have any spots up front, especially if Patrick is healthy, because you have down the middle already Couturier, Hayes, then Patrick and Frost and Lawton can play centre. And then at left wing, you've got Giroux and Lindblom and James Van Riemsdyk. And then at right wing, you've got Voracek and Konechny and Farabee, who's actually a left wing playing out of position, in effect. And then you have Obe Cabell, who was fantastic last year and deserves his spot. And then you have Raffle. Now that's 13 men already. At the forward group, you've got to assume that in an ideal world, they'd be carrying 14. So then is that 14th man going to be, say, Sandin, who they signed? Is that 14th man going to be Bunneman, who performed well last year? And then on defense, I guess you're probably going to have, if Morin is fit, is he going to be on that original squad? Or are they going to use Friedman like they did last year? So I think it's going to be interesting what the 23-man roster is, but there aren't that many permutations, because obviously you've got Hart and Elliott in net, and then you have 7 defensemen set, and then you have 13 forwards effectively set. So that's 22 guys with 1 space on the 23-man squad. And then you start talking about the extra 4 guys. So if let's just for argument's sake say that Connor Bunneman was the guy towards the end of last year who really stood out and played really well in that 4C role. So let's say you get the 23-man slot. Then if you're having 4 to 6 other players, well, you're going to need a goalie in there. Lyon's the only guy who I think they probably trust to be an NHL backup right now. Sandstrom's immensely talented and had a solid time over in Allsvenskan this year, but last year in the ECHL, it looked like he completely lost all confidence. And Ostimenko was good in the ECHL, but then pretty mediocre in the AHL, and you don't want to really pressure a guy into then having to step up and maybe relieve a start here and there. So I think, Lyon would certainly be one of the 6. And then I guess you'll probably go 2 defensemen and 3 forwards, like logically. And I guess the defenseman would probably be, if Friedman isn't the extra man for the 23, he's certainly one of those 2 defensemen. And then I think really probably the only other option is Zamula. He's the guy who kind of, they took in the bubble with them. They obviously really like him and he's immensely talented. And then up front, you've got Sandin, who I think is certain to be one of those guys. And then a few forwards who I think are going to be fighting for spots. I think it's going to be interesting to see if they call back over from Europe. From the indications, it seems, obviously nothing concrete, it might be that they leave Rupsov and Sushko in the KHL for the year, especially if they're not sure if the AHL is going to start. But it seems like Cachet is actually going to come back over. They've released him to the national team. He's playing for the Czech national team as the 1C, actually, right now for the Czech national team in the Channel 1 Cup, which is like the European Hockey Tour. So all the best European players who are based in Europe playing against each other. So he's a real option for that. And he did play last year and, scored a goal and looked solid. And then you have, Twerinski. Is he going to be a guy? Is Lashinsky might be more talented than Bunneman and Twerinski? So it's going to be really interesting to see who gets those spots. If it was me, I would probably take Bunneman because you know he can do a job at the NHL level. Sandy and maybe David Cachet as the 3 forwards, and then take Zamula. And if Friedman isn't on the original roster, Friedman with Lyon. I think that's the safest insurance policy you're probably going to have if you need a squad like that.
Yeah, I think that was actually really well said. I don't really have any disagreements there, to be honest with you. The Morin thing is interesting because it depends on where he is, but I could see them wanting him to hang around the team, like the NHL team, just because I don't think they ever planned on really playing him in the AHL that long. I think if they could have, they already would have forced the issue and have him in the NHL. I think physically, it's a little underestimated how dominant he potentially can be physically, but we just don't know. Zamula is like an X card where, like, if the kid is somehow makes another weird jump and all of a sudden is ready for top 4 minutes in the NHL, I'm not saying it's going to happen, but all of a sudden you see Provorov and you see Zamula and you're like almost like natural fit. Like, can this be like an awesome Russian pairing of some sort? And I would love to see something exciting. But I totally agree with you. I think there is kind of just these logical choices and what we'll start with. So I don't have any disagreements overall. The Kasha thing is interesting. It's interesting he's playing center. Do you think overall he's playing center over there? Because in my opinion, Kasha has NHL level talent. I think he has some shortcomings, but he's very smart. He's a great skater. He's a two-way player with an offensive upside. I don't know if he's going to hit the levels that his brother has, obviously in the NHL, but I think if he was even on a less deep franchise, he probably would already be, you know, maybe more time in the NHL, maybe some more swing time. Do you think he's playing center because he's kind of ready? You know, I kind of take that as a two-way role.
I think he's a really good facilitator with the puck. He's fantastic at making zone entries, so drives play. And he's a slightly better passer than he is a scorer, even though he has a decent shot. And over there, obviously, the extra league is a good league, but it isn't quite AHL level. I would say it's not far off, but it's still a step below. It's not like the SAL or Liga or KHL, where, you know, KHL is better than the AHL, and Swedish Hockey League is similar and maybe slightly better, and Liga is only a step below. So there is some level of, well, he's one of the more talented players in the league. And it's worth noting that he played on the line with Jakub Lauko, who was a second-round pick a year and a half later. Well, 2 years later than him. He's a year and a half younger or so. And it was Kasha who took the centre spot and not Lauko, who has played centre in the past. But I think going forward, I don't think he's a centre. I've really enjoyed watching him play centre this year. And he works really hard defensively, and he has a decent, you know, he has a real intensity and gets back on almost every play. Combine that with his skating, and he's always there or thereabouts, but he isn't an instinctive defensive player. He's not as good defensively as his brother, and he doesn't see the ice in the defensive zone as well as I think he should. So I think he will shift back to left wing, most likely, although he can play a bit of right wing as well going forward. Yeah, but I do think it shows that he's very close to ready. I mean, in the Czech, he's been one of the best players in the league.
Right.
No contention there. I think it's 16 points in 18 games on a team who were slated before the league in Karlovy Vary to be kind of in the relegation battle, and he's got them into like 5th or 6th position. And most of it has been him, quite frankly. He's dominated games. He runs the power play for them. And as a result of that, that's why he's starting as the #1 centre for the Czech Republic right now.
Yeah, and you're right, man. I mean, it's really interesting to see. I kind of take it as, you know, if you're willing to play a player as center is because you consider him probably your best player. I mean, if you're converting him from a winger to a center, it means you really want the puck on his stick. You trust him in you know, pretty much all 3 zones. You know, and even though what you're saying about the league, it's interesting though, because we are going through COVID. So there are kind of players shifting around, and maybe, you know, some of these kind of lower levels, they do have a little bit better talent than usual. Maybe not completely different, but maybe a player here and there where the challenge and the level of competition does increase. So it's interesting to see, you know, it's interesting to see that they didn't keep him at his comfortable position, that they decided they can leverage him, you know, to really benefit an entire line. Cause that's how I see the center position. You know, it's really a play driver, like you're saying. It's a crucial role. Yeah.
He hadn't played there, I believe, since he was 17, really full time. I mean, he was kind of in junior hockey, he played center for the Czech under-16 and under-17 and under-18 team. He played center. But, you know, since he made his pro debut in the Extraliga when he was an 18-year-old or so, he was mainly a wing, the occasional, you know, time at 4C. and then went to Sweden and was at wing, and in Lehigh Valley he's been exclusively at wing. So it's been a good 4 years since he's played centre, and he's done well there, offensively especially. Defensively, he's worked really hard. He's made some really nice individual plays, some nice flashy plays as well, with some great stick checks and steals. But he's not the kind of guy who's going to be in position in the right place all the time, like a Couturier, like Nolan Patrick if he's healthy, like Scott Lawson.
Yeah, and that's the indication again. But we'll see. We'll see what Kasha can do, because maybe there'll be some opportunity. There'll definitely be injuries. So he got an opportunity last year. I could see him maybe getting another opportunity, especially under the conditions and, the things with Rubtsov and, Sushko, who's also another guy who probably will get a look at the NHL at some point, right? It's just so much competition there. That's the only thing I really feel like holds back Kasha is just a lot of talent in this org.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on here. Since we're talking about young players, we have the World Junior Championship coming up. I mean, I believe it's starting tomorrow, the exhibition games. We're recording this on the Saturday, the 19th. I think it's starting on the 20th, right? There's a USA game that opens it up. So that's pretty exciting. World Junior Championship. And speaking of USA, the Flyers have a couple guys on USA. I do want to go through USA a little bit, but I do want to talk about Mason Millman first and Tyson Forrester. I want to talk about Canada because they didn't make it. So from what I understand, Mason Millman got cut early. I think you mentioned something, Alex, so I'll let you speak in a second here about Millman potentially not making because of COVID concerns, but also maybe a combination of fact Canada is so deep that it's like, just can't make that squad. And also Tyson Forrester, I think also is not a well-balanced enough player, or at least developed enough player to make that deep Canadian team maybe next year. But it didn't seem like he was going to make it. So they both get cut early. What do you think about Forrester and Mason Millman, and specifically Mason Millman on his ELC, and why you think he received that, especially right after not making Team Canada? It's not unheard of, but it's a little rare.
With Millman, I think I'm a real big fan of his game. He has all the fundamental skills to be an NHL defenseman, and there's no real red flags with him. People look at his production and go, he's not really lighting up the OHL. I think he had 44 points in 58 games last year for Saginaw Spirit. But when you look at how he scores those points, that's the thing that really interests me more than anything. He's, for his age, always been kind of top 5 in the OHL in terms of scoring for a defenseman. You look at the names he lines up against in the OHL in terms of how he's scoring, and he's one of the best EV scorers in the NHL, and he's pretty solid defensively as well. He skates really beautifully, and he transitions the puck up ice well, and he's a good lateral mover. Now, offensively wise, he scores points, and he's good at getting the puck to his teammates, but I don't really think there's kind of proper, legitimate top 4 offensive talent there. That being said, I think he could be a number 4 in the NHL down the line, because it doesn't always take someone scoring 30 plus points to be a good number 4 defenseman. I think he maybe had a shot to make Canada's team, although he hasn't really been involved in the junior setup of Canada, under 18, under 17, and under 16 level. And we do know that's an enormous factor in how Hockey Canada evaluate people. If you haven't been a part of their club, in effect, since you were a kid, there's less chance you're going to be on the team. And if you're on the team, you're not going to play a big role. But still, they have a really talented blue line. Part of the reason as well was coronavirus. There's no indications that he had coronavirus, but because of kind of quarantine restrictions, maybe who was around, there were 5 players released at the same time kind of due to that. They didn't give him a chance to maybe make a run at the team. It's a real positive that he was even considered. Would have been great to see him there, and I think he would have more than held his own because he has a fantastic foundational skill set. I guess ELC is not a bad consolation prize for missing the World Juniors. In terms of why it was given at that time, it was an interesting timing to it. But I imagine it's probably likely that they intended to sign it. They were going to sign him anyway at some point. And it just kind of, with this year and the uncertainty and what's going to happen in the NHL and the OHL and AHL, it might be a case of, with the way that Ontario is going, maybe the OHL doesn't start. And if the OHL doesn't start, Mason Millman can go to the AHL if the AHL starts.
Yeah, and it seems like it is a vote of confidence where when I see a guy get an ELC, especially like a little early, I mean, it's not as crazy early. I'm sure it's slide eligible. I didn't confirm that, but I can't see it not being, right? And he still could have more time in juniors if he really wants. I think they just kind of look at him and they go, this guy's going to be a pro player to some degree. We know he's going to be a pro player, so why not just sign him now?
Yeah, and I think he's probably not spoken about enough in terms of where he is in terms of the Flyers' defensive prospects, because obviously York is number one, and Zamula's number two, and Friedman, while on the cusp of being prospect age, is also he's very close to the NHL. But then I think you have the guys after that for me right now are Hugby and Millman, and everyone knows how high I am on Hugby, and I think Millman is a similar level guy in terms of what he can end up being. I think he can easily be a number 4 defenseman who, might not blow up the scoreboard, but he's always going to move a puck really responsibly. Someone who, there are those guys who just move a puck really well, even though they're not the best defensive players. Someone who comes to mind, who the Flyers fans have seen a lot of, is like Calvin Duhan. He was a really good second pairing defenseman for a really long time, even though he rarely broke 25 points. Mm-hmm. But it doesn't mean that you don't have great skating and great puck moving. Right. And Millman he's not the same player, but in some aspects he reminds me of someone like that.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, I believe he struggled offensively in the beginning of the year, and then as it went on, he actually started lighting it up more, and his production went up. So I feel like that is a factor there, and when that stuff happens, you want to see how it translates into the following season, but it is kind of like an upward trajectory for Millman as well, and I think it's something to get excited about. I did have kind of these lists that came out, these ranking lists, and I had Millman. It's tough, right? Because I did the years of 2014 to 2020, Flyers drafted or undrafted, but essentially in the system, guys who kind of came up within, and I had Millman second to bottom. I had Linus Hogberg at the bottom, and again, these are just left-handed defensemen here. Mason Millman, Andre above him, Zamula above him, York above him, Sanheim, and then Provorov. But you look at those names, it's like the company he's with, he's not towards the bottom of that list, like with a bunch of chumps. It's like first round pick caliber guys who all have like elite talent. And from what I see about Millman, where do you see him with somebody like Emil Andre? How do you compare him with the ceilings?
I think Andre has a higher ceiling simply because he's got fantastic hands. He's got a really high offensive zone IQ. And there's the potential there, I think, for someone like Andre to be a number 3 defenseman who potentially runs a power play for you and puts up 40 points while providing good defense, because even though he's 5'9", he's a really broad guy who does not shy away from physical contact. So in terms of upside, I think Andre is higher. And overall, I would rank Andre higher. I think on my list when I was running through the defensemen for the Athletic with Charlie, it was York, Zamula, Andre, then Friedman, Hogberg, Millman as the top 6 prospect defensemen. But right now, Mason Millman might be a slightly better player than Andre right now in terms of how well-rounded he is and how developed he is, because Andre's biggest problem is he isn't the fastest guy for a small guy, and he's really aggressive at the blue line, but against men it can sometimes trip him up because he'll be slightly too aggressive. Now if you can iron those 2 kinks out, he's a really good professional defenseman, because he's already one of the best young defensemen in the SAL this year. I think people overlook sometimes just how hard it is to play SAL at 18 years old. How many guys can play AHL at 18 years old and tread water? And SAL is arguably a slightly higher level, at worst the same level. So you have someone like Helge Grans this year. Helge Grans didn't make the World Junior team. Helge Grans has been worse than Andre in almost every measurable apart from power play production. In his Corsi, in his defensive statistics, in his even strength statistics. So it is difficult to play at that level. But I think Millman is just slightly ahead right now in terms of where he's at. And because of his great athletic skill set, there is a higher floor there.
Do you think if Andre didn't have the height on paper deficiency of being 5'9" and maybe being in the mold of a Chemo Timonen, do you think he would have been drafted higher in this draft?
I think he would have gone top 20. I think he was the 3rd best defenseman in that draft in terms of actual ability, once you ignore size and speed. But obviously size and speed are 2 enormous factors in someone becoming an NHL defenseman. And that's why he fell to the 2nd round. But yeah, in terms of raw talent, when you're talking kind of hands, offensive IQ, shot, passing, the skill abilities, Andre, I think, was the 3rd most talented in the draft.
Yeah, and Steve Kornianos, the draft analyst, he actually believe he said almost the exact same thing you did about Andre. And I do find that very interesting, because I love 2nd round pick defensemen, not because they're always a hit, but because if I look at majority of my personal favorite defensemen in the NHL, a lot of them were taken in the second round. So I always look for these defensemen who kind of have a deficiency at the draft, but maybe can be fixed, right? Through hard work, through effort. Like the skating can be improved. His size, obviously, he can't do anything about that. But the game is changing. Smaller defensemen are definitely becoming a thing. So if he can, increase his speed and utilize his game really well, especially on a smaller rink, in the NHL, it could actually be a humongous boost for him. And he could end up being like one of these guys who'd be, initially considered flawed and then somehow puts it all together and just plays his game at a pro level. I mean, do you see that ability with Andre? Could be sky's the limit type of guy.
I mean, I'm not sure sky's the limit simply because he's really skilled, but he doesn't have the kind of skill as someone like, say, Sanheim.
Okay.
And obviously Sanheim has amazing physical abilities on top of that, but it wouldn't shock me if in 5 years' time, everyone's saying, well, wow, we got a 40-point defenseman who plays a good two-way game in the second round. And I think, the height for me is less of an issue than his speed. He's agile. He has actually quite good agility and edges, and when he's set up, he can deep guys, he can go past them. But he can get kind of burnt in a straight line, especially if he gets caught flat-footed in the neutral zone, or if he gets caught reaching in the defensive zone at the blue line. Because one thing I do like is he's a really aggressive defenseman at the blue line. But it gets him into trouble at times because he doesn't have the skating to back it up.
Right.
But from a size perspective, one of the best defensemen in the NHL right now is Jairus Virgin, who is the same height as Andre and slighter. You had Kimmo Timonen, who's pretty much the same height as Andre and a similar build. You've had someone like Tobias Enstrom, who was also, that size and a really good top four defenseman for a very long time. Yep. So the size itself, I don't really worry about, especially because he's a really broad guy. And at the SAL level, he doesn't struggle in terms of one-on-one battles in the board. Usually, even with guys bigger, you have a guy like Engvall, who's 6'6", was under NHL contract. I think he played a couple of NHL games for Chicago. And, in the games of HV71 versus Färjestad, you've seen Andre on ice versus him in one-on-one battles. And he hasn't maybe won them, but he's tied him up long enough for a teammate to come and assist on the boards. And, that's an 18-year-old kid against a fully grown, 25-year-old man he's given up, 9 inches in height to. So the size doesn't worry me too much. It's just the straight line speed. He has a bit of a choppy stride, which I think needs some rectifying as well. But if you can do that, you have a guy who's a legitimate top four talent in terms of where he's going to end up as a defenseman. I feel like
I don't know, man. I hear it and I feel like you're right. Everything you say is right, but I feel like the skating, I feel like it will be fixed. It almost feels like I look at I mean, I've only seen, some glimpses of the kid. Obviously, you've seen more of him. I've seen the skill. It's evident. At first, I was kind of hesitant around the pick. Then you kind of see him. You're like, okay, like I see glimpses of Timonen in here. I see the physique. I saw the size, the weight, the ratio there, the body mass. And, you start compensating for the lack of height. But, that's why I was saying that about the second round pick. Like, imagine he does come in with improved skating. Like Oscar Lindblom had a skating issue. The guy wasn't supposed to be a 5th round pick, right? He was supposed to be a late 1st round pick guy, and people kind of gave up on him. I wouldn't say he's like a burner today, but I wouldn't say skating is an issue for Oscar Lindblom at all. Would you see maybe potentially something like that?
I think the only difference I see is I think with Lindblom, his skating was partially just due to physical development because he always had kind of a fine stride. There was no technical issue with his stride. It was just, I think, a case of he was, a 6'2", 17-year-old kid who was probably 175 pounds at that point and might not have developed his lower body to the degree that he did over the next year or so. So he immediately got by the time he was draft +1 towards the end of the year in the SAL, it was rare he'd get beaten. And he has such a high IQ that he's usually a step ahead of a guy anyway, so he can make up for that. I mean, we've seen now in 120, 130 NHL games of Lindblom. Can anyone point out a point where he's been beaten in a foot race? There aren't very many of them because, like someone like Sean Couturier, not an amazing skater, but he's got an extra second in his mind. With Andre, his technique is a bit worse than Lindblom at that same age, even though he might be a better skater in terms of edge work and agility, maybe speed, but his stride is shorter and a bit sloppier. So I think there's some technical work done there, but he has a really good foundation with his edge work. And how he can move laterally in the defensive zone, how he can make people miss in the offensive zone especially. And if he can rectify a bit of technique and get a bit stronger, because he is obviously this is a kid who's probably 185 pounds at 5'9", just turned 18 years old. You know, he's quite broad, and I think maybe his strength might catch up with his weight at some point in the next year or so and help his skating quite a bit.
Cool. Yeah. And I'm hoping to see that. I'm excited. I always look to see development over time. Andre seems like kind of a long-term thing. Like, I don't see him making the NHL, you know, obviously until maybe 22, you know, something like that. He's going to need time to develop in the, you know, maybe SHL, maybe he comes over to the AHL first and plays the top pairing role, that type of thing. All right, let's move on here to America, because I'm pretty excited about the fact that Cam York and Bobby Brink will both have a big role for Team USA. I do expect Bobby Brink to have a big role. I don't know if he's going to play top line. I think it's potential there. But, you know, just with his overall game, the fact he seems to be a complementary playmaking forward, he's gritty. He seems to have success at all levels that he's played, and I've no problem adjusting to higher levels of talent. So I expect him to maybe have a top 6 role, but, you know, probably top 9 with Team USA. And then Cam York makes the team as well. I don't know exactly if this is going to happen, but I do kind of anticipate he'll be a top 3 defender on that team, potentially top pairing, maybe number 1 defenseman, but we'll see. I don't want to make too much assumptions. I don't know Team USA as well as I did a couple years ago because of everything that's gone on lately. Where do you see York? Where do you see Brink? And how do you feel about like Team USA and where they stand within the team?
I think York's going to be the clear-cut number 1 defenseman and number 1 power play quarterback. He's with a similar group of guys as he was at the under-18 level now, as they've all kind of matured and graduated together. He was the youngest defenseman on the team last year and the only returnee. Mm-hmm. And he was taken last year despite having a shoulder injury and a high ankle sprain, because they valued him enough that he can help on the power play. So I can't see him not being the number 1 power play defenseman, especially with who else they brought. The only other defenseman I think who's a comparable talent level to him is Sanderson. But Sanderson's younger and not as experienced at the NCAA level. So I think he's going to be a number 1 power play guy, whatever. In terms of where he's going to sit on the depth chart, what's interesting with the USA is they have 3 right shooting defensemen, but 2 of them are quite kind of inexperienced. And the only one who has a bit more experienced is Helleson, who's, you know, had a solid start to the NCAA season this year. I don't know the exact amount of points in games, etc., but, you know, he's maybe clocking over 0.5 points per game in 4, 5, 6 games he's played. And he's a right shot defenseman and has played at the under-18 national level. So maybe he's a guy who potentially could be Cam York's partner as a more, you know, defensively sound guy, although Cam York is fantastically defensively himself. But maybe, you know, maybe they have the one pairing that's lefty-lefty is York and Sanderson, because York can play both sides. But either way, I think he's going to be first pair and number 1 power play. And I expect him, quite frankly, to be one of the best defensemen in the tournament. It might be high expectations, but if he isn't one of the top 5 defensemen in the tournament, I'll be slightly disappointed in his tournament.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. My perception on York is I think people were soured on York a little bit because of the Cole Caulfield situation, right? And I don't diminish Cole Caulfield at all. I think he's a fantastic player. I think it's actually an indication of why I'm even more excited about York, because I don't think the Flyers are stupid. I don't think their scouts make that type of decision lightly to pass on Cole Caulfield, because he was taken obviously immediately afterwards. I think they see something special in Cam York. Maybe it wasn't that way, but the fact he's, again, an underager in almost every situation, underager for the development program, the U.S. development program as well. Youngest defenseman, right? Leading the team in points, playing with an excellent crop and being a complete play driver. And I remember reading quotes from his coach saying that he never got beat in practice, essentially. It's just like doesn't happen to him. He does seem to me like a future top pairing, number 1 defenseman, even potentially in the NHL. I don't know if he's going to come in there and light the world on fire like Quinn Hughes. I feel like he's going to have maybe a more measured entry into the NHL, but I do see him as a potential top pairing. Is that how you see him in the NHL as well?
I think top pairing, I can definitely see that. I have maybe struggled seeing him as a number 1, simply because he's very good at a lot of things, but not truly excellent at many, apart from skating. I can definitely see him as a number 2 defenseman because he's so polished. The poise and calmness he possesses when breaking the puck is fantastic. He's defensively a plus player at every player he's been at. You know, a lot of the time people see an offensive defenseman and think, he can't play defense. But with Cam York, that's not an issue, and that's why he was drafted so highly, because he might only be 5'11", but he's not lacking in kind of size. I would guess he's now, you know, 195 or something like that. And when he's at the NHL level, he's probably going to be 200 pounds. And he skates like the wind. He's got a really good stick. He can be physical. And he's really good on the cycle in terms of puck possession. There aren't many defensemen at a junior level who possess the puck as well as him and hold off players as well as him and create space for teammates as well as him. Now, the only thing that at times, is a bit frustrating with him offensively is he is a very route one defenseman in general. He doesn't, once he's in the offensive zone and established, try too many skill moves usually. It's usually, maintain the cycle, get shots off, pass to teammates, don't play high risk. But it's really effective. So I don't really see more than, maybe a 35, 40-point NHL defenseman. Although maybe you prove me wrong, especially if you can win a power play one role. But I just see him as a super solid two-way defenseman who's going to play top four for a very long time. Kind of like a man with a very similar colour hair to him, Eric Desjardins Redux. I don't think it would be crazy, obviously, different-handedness, but I don't think it would be crazy in 10 years' time for York to be... not obviously the same level as Desjardins, but play a kind of a similar role with a bit less minutes in that he can penalty kill. He can play power play. He can eat minutes at even strength and move a puck really well with beautiful skating. So, yeah, that's where I see him. And I think it wouldn't shock me in 5 years if he's the Flyers' number 2 defenseman. It wouldn't shock me as well. But I don't not
Yeah, no, I think that's pretty fair assessment there. I don't really disagree. Do you think he has any chance to make the NHL quickly, or do you see him as being an AHL guy first?
It's interesting. I think in ability level, he could come out next year and play NHL.
I think so too.
I think for 2021-22, there's a legitimate chance that he just comes into camp and he's one of the Flyers' best full defensemen. In terms of him versus Zamula, I think that's an interesting one of who's actually ahead right now. I think they're quite close, but York has the physical advantage, especially with Zamula missing time and Zamula being a beanpole, for want of a better word, in terms of his size. He's really physical and very good at the blue line, but I think the injury, plus him naturally being quite a slight guy, I believe his dad was a basketball player when he was a kid, and you can kind of see that in his build. He might take slightly longer, even though I think he could play NHL right now. But so yeah, I think York can come in and win a spot, and I think it's probably going to be next year kind of a York versus Zamula fight for a spot, which should be interesting.
Yes, I have a very similar assumption. Actually, I can almost repeat the same thing. My thought that next year is, with expansion coming in, maybe you lose Ghost, maybe you lose one of the defensemen. You're obviously not signing Gustafsson. And a guy like York, I'm looking on paper, he's already playing NCAA hockey. If he continues to develop at the rate that he's going, unless you come in and bring in some kind of really good veteran, odds are he's going to be the best player you have available on the back end coming in. Could be Zamula as well. And I would say if Zamula is ready, maybe they give him the edge and be like, all right, let's just sit at York just because, we have an order here and there's no real difference between Zamula. I could see that happening. But I really do see Cam York because of and Zamula has poise as well. I think he's excellent. But there is something to Cam York where I actually just listened to an interview with him. He already sounds like a pro player. He acted like a pro player when he was drafted. And I just feel like he has a lot of that same ability that Farabee has, where he's kind of ahead of the curve in a lot of ways, maturity mentally. Do you see any of that?
Yeah, I mean, when I spoke to him at the World Juniors, we spoke about kind of his path in hockey. He played, roller hockey as a kid, growing up in California. And kind of made a decision at 14 years old to move away from his parents and go to a hockey playing state where there was more opportunity for him. And I think that kind of goes a long way, when you're moving thousands of miles away from your parents as a 14-year-old, 15-year-old to play the US program. And you really see it. Yeah, I think he's a really mature guy who I don't think he's ever going to have any issues in terms of going to a new place, fitting in, jumping up a level. And I don't think much phases him.
Yeah, that's a pretty good assessment. All right, we're getting close to the hour here. I do want to go through Bobby Brink still as well, and then I do want to ask you just your quick thoughts on the draft overall. But what do you think about Bobby Brink and his role with Team USA and where he is in his development?
The USA forward group is really strong. I mean, when you start looking at it, there's definitely an argument that they're the strongest group in the whole tournament. The depth they have is preposterous. They already have guys like Zegras and Turco, who probably NHL level players pretty much right now. And then you have guys like Cole Caulfield, and then even some of the kids, like Matt Benier, who's, Cam York's teammate at Michigan, might be 3C, and he's an immensely talented player. So whoever Brink plays with, he's going to play top 9. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
Right.
Whoever he plays with, I think it's going to be a matter of kind of mesh. And if it's Seagrass, if it's Turco, if it's Venier, he's going to have some really nice offensive opportunities. And unlike at Denver, where basically it's him and Carter Savai, who's younger than him and also kind of a scorer, and Brink has to be the facilitator at Denver. I think on that USA squad, he can probably cash in on other people's ability a bit more in the wing. He has a fantastic IQ, gets to positions brilliantly. You know, funnily enough, like Andre, the reason he fell was size and skating, but with Brink, his skating came on leaps and bounds in the last year, to the point where now he is really, really agile with great edges and lateral mobility. His speed isn't still amazing, but it's not a detriment anymore. So personally, I see him playing probably a middle 6 wing role. I would guess second line in terms of usage. Be that with Seagrass, be that with Turco. And then also power play 1. He played power play 2 in the World Juniors last year, even when he was on the 4th and 3rd lines. And this year, I don't see who's going to really beat him out for a role there. If he does play power play 2, he'll be the guy who runs it from a forward perspective, I guess. So yeah, he's going to play a pretty big role, and he played well at last World Juniors, even though he had a limited role. And I think this time he could have a really nice World Juniors.
Yeah, and he does seem like a perfect forward for that group. Like the names that you're mentioning, I just feel like he kind of grew up around a lot of these players anyway. Like he wasn't officially part of that U.S. program, but I know he was at times. I know it's like he's kind of this player who's been like slightly on the outskirts, but also part of that same elite crop of players. It's almost like he's oddly on the outside just because of his skating. And it's like, if his skating was there, he would be like an upper echelon pick, and it's like, or a player. And, you know, it seems to me at this point that probably middle 6 forward, but maybe he'll get some touches on the top, the top line if he maybe plays above his head or just has a really good fit with some players. I think it'd be really good for a guy like Brink, because I don't know if he gets enough recognition for the type of production he's really putting up.
Yeah. In his draft year, I think I was quite vocal at the time of saying I thought he was a top 15 talent.
Yep, I remember that.
His USHL statistics and how he played at that level were brilliant, and most years would have got him a top 10 spot in the draft. It was just the fact that he's, 5'8", and was at the time under 170 pounds and isn't the greatest skater. But I think he's gone a long way to solving a lot of those problems. He's been working constantly with power skating coaches to really develop his stride. He's really agile now. You know, in tight spaces, he's kind of a bit like Giroux in terms of, you know, he might not be the fastest skater in a straight line, but he's extremely evasive. And combine that with a high IQ and great touch, vision, and passing. And he creates a lot of opportunities, both for himself and his line mates. And this World Junior should be a real measuring stick for him.
Yeah, that's going to be an exciting one. So before we wrap up here, we have about 5 minutes left. So before we wrap up, we took some other players. We took Elliot Denoyer. We took a Zaid Wisdom, Conor Mclennan as well from this past draft. I just want to go through the 3 of them briefly. I just want your quick thoughts. Obviously, Elliot Denoyer has kind of exceeded expectations, at least for the start of the season. It's probably going to continue. He's playing a center role. All of a sudden, I got him listed as a left wing in my rankings, but he's already been playing center and probably will continue playing center for a good amount of time. His production has gone way up. His role has gone up. He seems to be some kind of steal. Zaid Wisdom, again, even at the time, seemed to be a really smart pickup, a guy with an NHL future, a lot of raw talent, but still some skating issues. But already getting an ELC, already a vote of confidence. And then Conor Mclennan, I believe he's been putting up some good points and a really strong start so far this season. But a guy who at one point, I believe was actually rated pretty high, and the Flyers kind of got lucky taking him. But what do you think about those 3 guys? What do you think about how the Flyers came out with those 3, and did they get good value, and where you see them in potential future?
With Wisdom, he was drafted roughly right around where I expected. Maybe 5 slots higher than I had him in my mock, but I don't think it was like a reach in any way. He's a good, solid player, and I think it's really easy to project him as a potential third liner down the line. I don't think his upside is more than a third liner, but I can see him really being, you know, a good pro. And he's the kind of guy who Flyers fans will really like in the way he plays the game. It's going to be interesting to see how he does in the OHL if the OHL starts. Because he has the potential for a breakout, especially with who he's playing alongside. With Denoyer, I think he was a guy who they got at a later point than I expected him to go. I expected Denoyer to go kind of, you know, top 120 in that kind of 100 to 140-ish range, and was shocked he fell to the Flyers. because he has a really good foundational skill set. I don't think his production this year is a true, complete mirror of his talent level. He has 25 points in 16 games, and I think maybe if he continued that for the whole year, people might expect a bit too much of him, because some of that has quite frankly been driven by the fact that while he has a good shot, he has like a 20% shot percentage right now, which is not going to continue. And he's playing with a good player in Lahoro. But at the same time, it's fantastic. You can't deride someone for taking advantage of an opportunity. He's got a Halifax on a good team after being moved and rolling with it. And I think he's a bit of a wild card right now in that if he continues this kind of production this year, it's rare to see a guy with a skill set like his and production like that not become a good pro. So yeah, I think it's really, really exciting to see how he's played in the QMJHL. And yeah, I think right now it's looking like the Flyers got a steal because if there was a redraft right now, I think you'd have a hard time letting him go outside the top 90.
Yeah.
And sorry, go ahead. And as for Conor Mclennan, he was a guy who personally I had in, I think, just inside my top 100. He's a guy I really liked. And like Andre and like Brink, the only reason he wasn't taken around them is because of his size. Because he's a small guy, super skilled, was fantastic for Winnipeg Ice. He was up well over point per game, like 49 in 41, 49 in 42, something around those figures here in the WHL, on a team that wasn't that talented. And he was kind of the guy. And this year he's in the AJHL, like pretty much the best level alongside the BCHL you can really get once you can't play WHL, because it's not started yet. He's had a solid start. I've not seen any of it, obviously. AJHL is kind of hard to come across. But he's a guy who I liked a lot before the draft. And I was really happy they got where they got him, because he's a guy who, you take a home run on a player like that every single time in my eyes. Yep, maybe he ends up just a good European League pro because of his skill and ability. But if he develops well, then there's the potential for someone like that to, who knows, be a middle six forward in a few years. And as the NHL is progressing and as time goes on and speed and skill become even more important, you see players like that prosper even more. 10 years ago, it would be strange to see a guy who's 5'8" playing in the bottom six role in the NHL, and now it's not a rare sight. There are guys around that height that, if they have the skill and they have the ability and they have the two-way ability, which McLennan does, then they can make the NHL. So yeah, I was really happy with that pick. That was the kind of pick that got me really excited at the time. And so far, Desnaya is obviously giving a lot of room for excitement as well.
I love that. So let me ask you this, and I'll ask you this before I end the show here. How do you see Conor Mclennan compared? Because again, he's a late round pick, a guy who probably shouldn't have been taken in the 7th round based off of skill. I mean, I heard the same thing about him as well. And if you play NHL 21, and if you guys take any of that seriously, I mean, he's not ranked as like some kind of throwaway prospect in there. I don't think that those things are that accurate, but it just shows you a mentality of some of the scouts. They have him listed, top 6 forward in their mind. So they see skill, right? They see a high level of skill. What do you see about a player like that versus like an Ali Lishkill, right? A guy who also has skill, also gets taken really late in the draft, also has pro upside. I believe he's doing pretty well in SHL right now. What do you see? Like, do you see a similar type of comparison there?
I think McLennan probably... It's difficult to really evaluate because they're in such different positions. With Lixell, there are less issues in regards to he is a decent size. I think the kid's 5'11", 6 foot now, and competing against him and doing a good job. And he's kind of Lixell's interesting in that he's a bit of a hot rod with the puck on his stick. He loves to make high skilled plays, but at the same time, he's kind of defensively responsible. This year he's been solid, but he hasn't really kicked onto the next level that I thought he would. He's had some really good games, but he just hasn't been consistent, which is strange because when he was at Linköping, he was generally kind of a modicum of consistency. If I was going to choose between them, geez, that's a hard decision. I think McLennan has a higher upside, but I think Lixell is more likely to be an NHL player at this venture. If Lixell just simply keeps developing at the rate he is, he's going to be a guy in that kind of Sushko kind of range where you're like, oh, Sushko, Tworinsky, Bunneman, where you're like, this guy's not ever going to set the world on fire, but he could be a good bottom 6 forward. But both of them are solid prospects, and I think that's the fantastic thing about the Flyers depth chart right now, that they have so many, especially at forward. young players who there aren't that many barriers to them being an NHL player. Simply just development and time.
And that's really what you need. You need to just kind of play the odds, right? Because most players will never touch the NHL ice. So get as many good prospects as you can and hope that as many of them make it through as possible. And if they at least very much make it to the AHL or some pro league, then I think organizations can say they did their job because they developed a pro hockey player. That's kind of how I see it at this point in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing the Flyers have done really well since Hextall first took over, is how many picks have the Flyers had where a year and a half after they were drafted, they aren't on track to at least have a shot at the NHL.
Right.
You look at the league, and so many players 2 years after they were drafted have no shot at a professional career. They play in university hockey in Australia, or playing in the Czech fourth tier, or they couldn't get, even 5 points in a season in the NCAA, or they left the OHL and went to Canadian university hockey and are never going to be seen again once they finish the degree. Whereas the Flyers have consistently drafted guys who, take someone like Jesper Pettersson. Jesper Pettersson was a 7th round pick. He came up to the AHL, was okay, but nothing special, and wasn't really an NHL player because he's a bit smaller. He isn't the best skater. But Jesper Pettersson's a guy who plays, top 4 minutes in the SAL. Someone like Bernhardt, who didn't offer any LC. He's on the top pairing in Liga. If you're getting guys in those later rounds who could play AHL and hold their own in AHL, well, there isn't that enormous a leap from being a solid AHL player to a 12th forward or a number 6-7 defenseman in the NHL. And I think, you just want as many rolls of that dice as possible. And the Flyers have done a really good job of not kind of striking out on those rolls. Yeah,
I agree. And I think that's where a lot of the depth has come from, is hitting those late picks. And it's been awesome to see. Alex, we're wrapping it up here, but where can people follow you? Maybe just give them an update on content, anything you're working out, working through, or anything upcoming. Maybe give yourself a little shout out.
Yeah, well, you can find me at Twitter. It's probably where I'm most active, at AV Appleyard. Generally, a lot of Flyer stuff, but also some wider prospect stuff. And over the World Juniors, I'll obviously be really active because it's pretty much my favorite hockey sans the NHL. In terms of what I'm working on right now, I actually have a few NHL 2021 draft pieces coming out for Smart Scouting, a kind of initiative that I came on board with Josh Tesla, who used to be at Future Considerations, working on together. So I'm doing all the European scouting for them. So we've already put out, I think I've put out 5-6 reports on Swedes. I'm putting out one on Eklund this weekend, who I think is the best forward prospect in the draft. The Flyers have no chance at him, but I wish they did. And then over the World Juniors, well, just before the start of the World Juniors, I've actually putting reports out on 2 players who potentially will be in the Flyers range. Stanislav Svosel, who's going to be at the World Juniors for the Czech Republic, and he's kind of slated to go in that 20, 25, 28 kind of range. And he's a really good defenseman without too many flaws. He's already playing well at the pro level in the Czech Republic. And then also I'm going to be doing one on Hellenius, centre from Jokerit, who's going with the Finnish team. He's already playing in Liga. He's a guy who a lot of people don't see as a first-round pick, and I understand why. But he's at like 0.5 points per game in Liga. He's going to be with this Finnish junior team at the World Juniors. And I think as a guy who's maybe second round, he could be a legitimate prospect for someone to take as well there. So keep an eye out for those. Generally pretty in-depth, 1,000-word reports on players with some highlights in there. So yeah, that's what I've been really working on in the next few weeks.
Awesome. That sounds great content. And guys, definitely check out Alex. I'll say it like I said in the beginning of the show. If you're a Flyers fan and you don't know him, you're not following him, you're missing out. You're falling behind some of the best analysis you're going to find on Twitter for sure. And I obviously read his stuff on The Athletic. But if you want even just the quick bites, I mean, Alex, your tweets are usually awesome. And they have tons of awesome info in there. You'll utilize analytics, but you also just utilize anecdotal evidence of your own opinions. And I think you balance that stuff really well. So absolutely make sure you check out Alex. And Alex, thank you so much for coming on, man. Second episode. And I feel like there's just so much good info in these episodes. Your last episode did fantastic on our network here. So pretty excited about this one. Thanks again, man. Appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, anytime. Pleasure being on again. I'm happy to do it again soon.
Cool. Yeah, absolutely. We'll definitely have you on soon. I'm excited about that. And hopefully we'll have a good season to talk about and exciting stuff. We can get through some of the results of all the stuff we've been speculating on for months and months. All right. So to everybody listening, thank you so much. Thank you again to Jim's Steaks on South. Thank you for sponsoring us. Again, you're going to see more of them all the time. I'm going to keep bringing them up because they're awesome. And, I take care of my health. I eat healthy for the most part. I don't eat a lot of carbs. Anybody who knows me, but I just get a bunch of meat in a bowl, and I love that. So, Philly all the way, Flyer fans all the way. So Jim's Steaks on South. Definitely make sure to check them out. And thank you for everybody for listening. Please like and subscribe if you enjoy. Check out the team store and whatever. But we thank you just for listening and giving us time. Remember to always stay